なざりきく最高の支配者とお前たちが呼ぶ存在だ。伊達ではないことを教えてやる。我が名を知るがよ。我こそがアインズウール・ゴウン。盗撮だ。
シャルティア・ブラッドフォール、一方的に楽しませてくんなまし。
アインズ様、もう我慢しなくても良いですよね。アインズ様に無礼を働いた者には全てことごとく死になさい。
互いの能力を知り、連携が取れた。俺もかつての仲間ほどだ。では始めるぞ。
やりですね。そろそろ終わりにしんしょうか。
Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I'm going to talk about the way to build the 3 Overlord collaboration heroes in Langrisser mobile. So the 3 are Ainz Ooal, Shalltear Bloodfallen, and Albedo. So let's begin by talking about the protagonist of Overlord, which is Ainz. A brief summary of Ainz is that first, his soldiers get plus 35% attack from the soldier boost. So as a result, they are fairly decent at doing damage to the enemies. And as a result, you're going to want to run either wizards or dark elf snipers on Ainz to take out the enemy soldiers. He does also have access to Hellfire archers as well as spider demons, but neither of those are as good as the wizards or dark elf snipers in my opinion. Next, he is a versatile mage. His talent gives him plus 15% intelligence, and what's worth mentioning is because it's an intelligence increase, his soldiers will not benefit from it. Ultimately, that means he is not top tier as a mage, because by comparison to, let's say, Lana or Rachel, their talents provide plus 30% damage increase, and that talent effect does affect the soldiers, unlike Ainz. So towards the end game, I believe Ainz will struggle to one-shot because his soldiers will not be able to one-shot the enemy soldiers, and thus Ainz cannot use all of his strikes on the enemy general. Nonetheless, he is still quite versatile because he has a wide variety of skills. For example, he actually has access to 3 single target strike skills. He has access to a total of actually 3 AoEs, although he can only bring 2 of them because his 3rd AoE skill is his 3C skill. He can teleport himself with a 1-cost skill. And finally, his 3C is actually 3 separate skills. The first skill is a permanent buff on himself where he can increase his mobility by 1 and change his movement type to flying. So he goes from a 3 movement ground character to a 4 movement flying character. The second effect of his 3C is it's a permanent buff on himself that can be used one time. It gives himself plus 15% hit points, and it also full heals Ainz himself to full health. And then the third skill he has is an AoE attack with the 3C. And this AoE is interesting because it actually only has a 3-turn cooldown. So it's a 3 range, 4 blast radius AoE that has a low cooldown of 3, as opposed to the usual cooldown of 5. Overall, as previously mentioned, he is a very usable mage, although probably not considered top tier. He can change his skills based on the opponent he's facing. For example, he can bring 3 single target strike skills, he can bring 2 single target strike skills with a teleport, he can bring 2 single target strike skills with his 3C. He can bring his 3C, an AoE skill, and then a 1-cost skill, which would be either lightning, a teleport, or his passive that has a 30% chance of triggering and would reduce the damage he takes by 90%. So now with this covered, let's move on to talk about Ainz's equipment. So as an intelligence-based mage with no conversions or anything like that, Ainz's set of gear is quite straightforward. It's the same as basically any other mage in the game. Keep in mind that if you're using Ainz for PvE content, any kind of SSR set will do. It's only if you're using him for PvP where the gear set starts becoming very, very important. In terms of enchants that you want to run on Ainz, I would say you would choose between either Breeze or Clocks. Breeze would give that +2 mobility chance, so potentially having Ainz have 6 movement to maybe get into range to launch single target strike skill or AoEs. And then Clocks would allow him to potentially trigger the ability to keep launching out AoEs endlessly as the Clocks effect applies. So your choice on which enchant to run. I would probably say it very much depends whether you're going to run a single target Ainz or a AoE Ainz, but my personal gut feeling is Clocks is the better enchant to keep launching out those skills. So in terms of gear set, the first set would be kind of like a hybrid set where you bring Red Moon and Holy Ring to maximize your intelligence and prevent yourself from getting silenced. And then the Tenyos Robe and Tenyos Headdress would allow Ainz to have the maximum hit points as well as being able to provide buffs to allies. The PvP AoE set would be Clocks, of course, to hopefully keep launching out his 3C AoEs. And with this set, you're probably going to aim for the maximum amount of debuffing on the enemy. So you're going to run the Miracle Staff, you're going to run the Tenyos Robe once again, you're going to choose between either a Soul Stealer Headdress or a Tenyos Headdress. So that one is kind of an optional choice because Soul Stealer Headdress can potentially silence enemies, whereas Tenyos Headdress would buff allies. And the accessory is, once again, this is a tough choice. If you bring a Vidar's Rose, you can potentially dispel buffs from enemies. If you bring the Holy Ring, you can once again be immune to silencing to make sure you can launch out those AoEs. So that last accessory is kind of a tough choice once more. Up to you which one you bring. PvE single target is about, once again, maximizing intelligence ideally and being able to launch out those single target strike skills endlessly. So I listed Clocks here, but keep in mind that Ainz can potentially run 3 single target strike skills, and that allows him to pretty much launch out the single target strikes endlessly anyways. But the difference is with Clocks, you can potentially keep launching out, let's say, the Dark Reaper, and Dark Reaper can disable 30% of the enemy's magic defense to allow you to do more damage. In addition, by running a Clock set like this with Dimensional Jewel, you can potentially choose to just bring 2 single target strike skills rather than 3, and it gives you a bit more versatility in the skill choices that way. With this set though, you're just maximizing Int once again, Red Moon with Dimensional Jewel. I would recommend the Charon for the helmet, because Charon can potentially apply a debuff that increases the damage taken by enemies by 15%. So this can maximize your damage output in terms of, let's say, having Ainz attack first, then your other characters follow up and might get that extra damage increase. So it's a great accessory for facing off against big bosses, like let's say the dragons, let's say the Eternal Temple fights, let's say Ancient Beckoning, stuff like that. And the final set is a set of easy to get gear. The items are free from, let's say, the world map or from events early game. And so this set of gear would be something like a Blue Moon, a Galaxy Cloak, which is incredibly common, a Dark Crown, which is also incredibly common, and then the accessory would be just a Drop Near, which you definitely get for free. So that would be example sets of gear for Ainz. So next, let's move on to talk about the second hero of the Overlord collaboration, which is Albedo.
お帰りなさいませ。アインズ様。お食事になさいますか？お風呂ですか？それとも私でしょうか？
So Albedo is basically an improved Vargas. While she is an improved Vargas, she does have different classes because she is either infantry class or demon class. So as opposed to Vargas being purely Lancer, Albedo is totally different in terms of the classes. She does guard against magic and physical attacks. So unlike Vargas who only guards against physical, Albedo does guard against both. Furthermore, her talent inherently gives her a 1-ring guard range. So even if she doesn't activate her guard skill, she can always guard allies from 1 ring of her. And the talent also ensures that her attack is equal to 1.6 times her defense, because she'll get this buff before combat begins. And finally, the talent also increases the damage she deals by 55 to 75% damage increase depending on her star level. She's just a very, very good tank She can also revive, but her revival is provided by her 3C skill. This is important to note because since it's provided by a skill, it can be disabled as long as the enemy disables your passives. So things like Peacemaker, Frontal Assault, these can potentially disable her passives and thus lead to her dying without getting to revive. Finally, it is important to note that Albedo does not have a ranged counterattack unlike many other heroes. This is one major limiting factor on Albedo, and one reason why I don't consider Albedo a top tier hero. In addition, her soldier boost is inherently defensive. It's 35% hit points, 15% attack, 35% defense, and 15% magic defense. This kind of defensive soldier boost means that her soldiers will not be killing enemy soldiers in general, and thus she may very well struggle to one-shot enemies just like Vargas does. Because if your soldiers don't kill the enemy soldiers, your hero is going to waste attacks on the enemy soldiers, and thus she won't have enough attacks to kill off the enemy general. But the soldiers that she can bring are the Phalanx soldiers as well as the Crystal Molders. Both are Lancers and they're both ideal soldiers for Albedo. Overall, I would say Albedo wants to be Demon class for PvE content and she wants to be Infantry class for PvP. The reason for this is because Demon class provides maximum stats, and secondly, and more importantly, you face off against a lot of cavalry enemies in PvE content. Being an infantry class means you're not going to do any real damage to those cavalry enemies, but being in demon class, you will do full damage. As for why infantry class is so important for PvP, the problem with PvP is that there's lots and lots of holy characters in PvP. Off the top of my head, holy characters I can think of right now include Yulia, Yusuke, Wyler, Licorice, Hobo, and these are just off the top of my head. These are all holy class characters that are very common in Apex boxes. There's other heroes that are used, like Chris, for example, who is holy class. Lana can be holy class. A lot of mages can be holy class too. So the result of this is that there's so many characters that counter a demon class enemy, makes it so that it's impossible to use a demon class hero in PvP, and especially when that hero is going to be your tank of all things. Finally, there is also no real reason to build Albedo at the end of the day because there's so many other tanks that are in existence and that you may have built, such as Ledin, Vargas, Landius, and Juggler. In addition to these four that I just listed, there's going to be Hilda coming out in 3 months. And Hilda is considered another absolute top tier tank. And since Hilda is also the faction buffer for the Reincarnation faction as well as a tank, it's much better than Albedo, who is a tank, but she doesn't faction buff. Nonetheless, if you do build Albedo and use her, she does have a lot of different types of gear sets that she can run. And I just listed 5 example sets of gear. These are not the only examples, but these are just 5 that she can use. First set is her primary set for PvP, what's considered her best set arguably. And what I feel she should run for enchants is 2 blue enchants, because this way she gets plus 10% defense and magic defense. The core of this set is that you get very high defense and magic defense, and your armor will give you extra survivability against either physical strikes or ranged strikes. So I'm running a Swordsmith Medal, Oath of Justice, and Carbon Fiber Helmet because all of these provide both defense and magic defense increase. And the Swordsmith Medal is the key point of all this because Albedo is one of those tanks that will want to use attack skills on the enemy because her talent inherently allows her to guard. Given that's the case, a Swordsmith Medal that provides immunity to silence will be very, very clutch for her to actually launch out those attack skills. And as for the other one, as for the armor, you can choose between Bloodline Magic Armor or Aeolus' Battle Armor. Up to you whether you want the melee strikes or the range strikes damage reduction chance. A second set Albedo can use is one that provides protection against cannot be healed effects. Cannot be healed effects are making a return because SP Elwin is rejoining people's parties. So SP Elwin means that Elwin can move 5 tiles, activate a skill to move I think an additional 3, and then launch out Sword Soul on your heroes. Keep in mind that Sword Soul dispels 5 buffs before applying the damage and then applying the cannot be healed effect on you. So it can dispel Gospel, the immunity effect. So having Blood Pact on your tank provides you immunity against that cannot be healed effect. With this kind of build, since you're running Blood Pact, you're going to probably want to maximize your hit points to maximize your survivability. I have listed here, for example, 2 green enchants for 20% hit point increase. You have the Blood Pact for a ton of hit points. You're going to bring a Flail for the weapon for another 10% hit point increase. And then armor is Aeolus's battle armor or Bloodline magic armor. And finally, for the helmet, I would say maybe the Ainz's helmet because it provides 10% hit points as well as 5% defense. The big drawback of this set of gear is that ultimately your defense will be fairly low, especially compared to the main set, because you have so many items providing hit point increases and not providing defense. So your damage output may be quite low with this set, although you're very, very tanky. The third set I have listed is the easy to get gear set. This would be like the early game set of gear for your tank if you're starting out. And you're going to want the Hard Rock enchant because early on you may not have the best healers yet, tiaras. So Hard Rock for that chance of healing up after combat is great. You're going to want the Oath Sword, the SR Oath Sword, because it provides plus 10% defense, and you might not have, let's say, an Oath of Justice yet. Armor and helmet will be Ainz's armor and Ainz's helmet, both of which you can get for free early on. So as long as you put a few epic martial spirits into them, you'll have a level 50 SSR, just like that. And finally, the King's Amulet will make her accessory because, once again, it's a free accessory, and it's a great accessory for tanks since it provides defense and hit points. And the special effect is that as long as there's an ally within 2 blocks of your tank, they get 10% defense and 10% magic defense. The fourth set I have listed is another reflection set. So this is actually more of a PvP build as well. You can say it's the third PvP build. And it's the same reflection set that Ledin basically runs. The whole concept of this is that you get 100% damage reflection so that any character who attacks you kills themselves. And it's a counter against ranged attacks specifically. So you're going to bring Thorns, you're going to bring Crystal Molders, and Crystal Molders have that range damage reflection. And then finally, you're going to bring the Drop Near for the range damage reflection as well. Important note, Drop Near increases intelligence and magic defense. Neither stat will really benefit Albedo because Albedo is about having defense and probably hit points. So you're looking at less stats with this reflection build. And the other 3 items is kind of up to you once again. I have listed some alternate items you can bring, such as the Broken Star. Broken Star because hammers provide more hit points than, let's say, swords do. So it provides a good amount of hit points and it provides 5% defense. A Mirror Armor because you might want it to break last rites from physical attackers. And then the Ainz's helmet would be for the hit points and defense once again. And the final set I have listed is a potential set for a PvE demon class Albedo. So I have listed here the Ice Enchant as a potential alternate enchant. I feel that you probably don't need the Ice Enchant, but it's there in case you might want it. The weapon is once again an alternate weapon. You can bring a Mjolnir because Albedo very frequently launches attacks, as I previously mentioned. Well, with Mjolnir, you can dispel a buff from enemies when you're attacking. I've listed yet another armor here, just selecting a random one. I mean, heavy armors generally are all great options, but having the carbon fiber armor gives you both 8% defense and 8% magic defense. And the helmet here that I recommend is actually Charon. So Charon can be used because you're going demon class, and the Charon provides 10% defense, and more importantly, it can provide that debuff on boss enemies, allowing other characters to do additional damage. And finally, for the accessory, I have listed the accessory that gives defense and hit points and +1 mobility. Because with this, your Albedo can have 4 mobility, which makes it easier for her to maneuver around and to attack enemies. Should mention that Albedo can also choose to run the other boots. They're Spirit Boots and Divine Boots. One provides +1 mobility, the other allows you to move 2 tiles after attacking. So you can attack, retreat 1 or 2 tiles to make sure you can guard all your allies within the 1 ring guard range. This would be more of a PvE oriented demon class Albedo. And now let's move on to talk about the third and final hero of the Overlord collaboration. And that is Shalltear, who is known for her legendary best chair scene. Shalltear's basic role seems to be a melee damage dealer for PvE content. And the main reason it's for PvE content is because her talent inherently requires you to be at 100% to benefit from it. PvP being what it is, it's very difficult to keep characters at 100%, which means that very often she won't benefit from her talent, and thus she's a PvE oriented hero as a result. But her talent is actually really, really good. It has multiple effects, and they are the following. First, when Albedo is at 100% hit points, she gets plus 20% attack, and she gets plus 2 mobility. And she gains the following buff. The next physical attack taken, she'll get 50 to 70% reduced damage taken. And there is a 3-turn cooldown on this final effect, but it basically means that the first physical strike on her will not kill her. She cannot get one-shotted by physical attacks. She also has a heal after melee combat effect, just like Elwin does. So she heals, 15, 20, or 30% hit points after combat. For PvE skills, what I personally recommend is that you bring the following 3. You're going to bring Armor Pierce and Purifying Javelin. Armor Pierce because that's 1.5 times damage with minus 30% defense reduction on the enemy after combat. Purifying Javelin because it's basically like a 2-range roar skill. These 2 skills are recommended because they have very low cooldowns. I think it's like 2 or 3 turns, as opposed to 5-turn cooldown skills. And then your third skill should always be Blood Frenzy. So Blood Frenzy's effect is that you can act again after attacking 2 times. It's kind of like Brenda, except Brenda needs to attack 3 times to benefit from an act again effect. Of course, the difference is Brenda's act again effect comes from her talent, whereas Shalltear needs to bring it in a skill. Nonetheless, being able to attack multiple times during a turn is of great benefit. And the soldiers that Shalltear uses are either gargoyles or Amazon champions, because she does provide a 35% attack boost to her soldiers, and given her talent of another plus 20% attack, it means her soldiers actually get 55% attack increase. So as long as she gets full hit points, she can one-shot characters quite easily. Overall, I would say when you use Shalltear, you want her to be demon class for PvE content because that maximizes damage output, just as previously mentioned. But for PvP, if you do try to use her, it's going to be difficult for sure, but if you do try to use her, I think you would want to use her in her Lancer class, because Lancer class is the class that can equip Apex Boots. So Apex Boots plus her talent gives her potentially 6 movement. If you activate, let's say, Breeze or get a Tenuous Headdress buff of mobility, she can have 8 or 9 movement to attack the enemy. The drawback of all this, of course, is it's going to be very difficult to keep her at full hit points to actually benefit from the talent, so you may have to think of her having less movement, and thus those Apex Boots will be absolutely clutch. But overall, I think it's just too difficult and it's just not worth the effort to use her in an Apex box. So let's move on to talk about her gear. So keep in mind though that these are sets of gear that she can use, but they're not absolutely required, okay? In terms of enchants, I would say she probably wants either Full Moon or Breeze, right? Maximum damage output, either enchant is good, right? In terms of equipment, her primary set would definitely be the Ragnarok, because doing fixed damage to the enemy before combat always helps, right? In terms of armor, probably the Aeolus' battle armor for the chance of reducing magic strikes to avoid getting one-shotted, right? Her talent already protects against physical strikes, so having the 2-range damage reduction from Aeolus' battle armor is probably more important. And helmet would be Vampire Mask in my opinion, simply because she's often constantly attacking, so you don't really need a Fury of Tyr. And given that she can act again a few times, having that Vampire Mask be able to provide a defense reduction on the enemies can always help. Finally, for accessory, pick any maximum attack increasing accessory, like Slayer's Emblem, like Judge's Talisman, like Winged Shin Guards, stuff like that, for the Demon class. An easy to form set of gear for Shalltear would be the following. You would bring the Last Knight, because everyone gets the Last Knight for free. You would bring a Carbon Fiber Armor, because these are very common drops. You would bring a Horror Helm rather than a Vampire Mask, because it's an SR rather than SSR. And once again, you would probably bring like a Winged Shin Guard, Judge's Talisman, Slayer's Emblem, whatever max attack accessory you have. An alternate set for Albedo, which would be quite common as well, would be replacing the Ragnarok with a Peacemaker. And the reason we would do something like this is simply because sometimes you would need to disable enemy passives as opposed to doing fixed damage before combat. Rather than the Aeolus' battle armor, Bloodline magic armor, just rotation between those two. Rather than the vampire mask, just bring a Fury of Tyr, and then max attack accessory once again for the accessory slot. And finally, if you're going to use a Lancer Shalltear, it would be once again Ragnarok, Aeolus' battle armor, vampire mask, and then the only thing you would change would be the accessory, which is the Apex boots for the +1 mobility rather than a max attack increase accessory. And there we have it. So these are the sets of gear I would recommend for these 3 heroes as well as their soldier choices. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video useful to you. And on that note, Nitro out.